Great. I haven't been given it yet, so don't worry.
Oh,
We haven't
I heard
started.
something from that.
Oh, no, I was just talking. Are you ready?
Shabbat Shalom. You might hear some different page numbers. I hope if you have the other Siddur for Shabbat, you can follow. But the page numbers you're going to hear are going to be, would you like to introduce?
Sure.
Okay.
Our service today begins on page 103 in the new Lev Shalem Siddur. Please rise.
Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan l'sech jivin l'levchi ben yom uven laila. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani b'tzalmo. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani ben chorin. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asani Yisrael. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam pokeach Ephraim. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam malbish arumim. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam matir asurim. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam zokef kfufim. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam roka haaretz al hamayim. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hamechin mitzadei gaver. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'asa li kol tzarkihi. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ozer Yisrael b'gvura. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam oter Yisrael b'tifaraha. Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hanoten laya'ef koah.
You may be seated.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam hama'avir sheina me'inai u'tunuma me'afapai. Utnenu hayom u'v'chol yom v'chein u'lachesed u'rachamim. Ve'einecha uve'nei kore'enu v'tigmelenu chasadim tovim. Baruch ata Adonai gomel chasadim tovim l'amo Yisrael. Ashrenu matov chalkenu umanayim goralenu umay yafa yerushatenu. Ashrenu shatnachnu mashkinim umarivim erev v'boker ve'omrim pamayim b'chol yom Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Kadesh et Shimcha l'makdishei shemecha v'kadesh et Shimcha b'olamecha u'vishat chatarim v'tagbia karnenu. Baruch ata Adonai mekadesh et Shimcha barabim.
Our service will continue on page 120.
Mizmor shir Chanukat habayit leDavid. Some Adonai chasidav u'lezecher kosho. Afachta mispedila macholi patachta sakibur zahadrini. Simcha leman yezemecha chabod v'lo yidam. Adonai Elohai leolam odeka.
Mortar Scottish, Ronald Lee Mortar Scottish on page
121. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah. Yolama divara chirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael Hagala v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevorach leolam uleomel maya. Yit barach v'yish tabach v'yit pa'ar v'yit romam v'yit naseh. V'yit hadar v'yit taleh v'yit halal. Shmei dekudisha b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tush b'chata v'nechamata. Da'miron v'yalma v'imru. V'hei shloma rabba min shmaya. Chayim alenu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom, alenu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.
Please rise on the top of page 122.
Baruch shamar v'haya olam, Baruch hu severeshit. Baruch my lords, Baruch my breath. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam ha'el ha'avarachaman ha'olam b'fi'amo. Yachid chei ha'olamim melech mishbach m'faradei ad shemo hagadol. Baruch atah Adonai melech mehulal batishbachod.
You may be seated.
Hodu l'Adonai ki v'shmo hodiu v'mimalu lotav. Shivalana Colorats Basru Biomeshuato Sapru Virgoyun Et Fodo Becholamim Liflotav Kigadol Adonai Umuhulal Meod Vinora Hu Al Kol Elohim Ki Kol Elohe Amim Alilim Vadonai Shmaim Asa Od Vadar Lefanavos Ved Bobim Combo Hovelar Please. Ramamu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu la'adom raglav kodoshu. Ramamu Adonai Eloheinu v'ishtachavu lahar kodsho. Ki kadosh Adonai Eloheinu v'hu rachem chaper vom v'lo yashchit v'hir balashiva po v'lo yirkol chamato ata Adonai. Adonai v'chasedecha kibelam. Amen. L'Adonai Hoshua Amcha Birchatecha Selah. Adonai Tzvot Yimanu Miskav Lanu Elohai Yaakov Selah. Adonai Tzvot Asher Adam Bateach Bach. Adonai Hoshia Melech Yanenu V'yom Kareinu. Hoshia et Amecha Uvrechet Nachlatecha Urim V'nasem Ad Haolam. Nafshenu Yikatal Adonai Asherenu Maginenu Hu. Keep it. Ashrei ha'am shekachalo, Ashrei ha'am shadonai olahav, Ani b'chastecha v'tachti, Yageli bi b'shuatecha, Ashir el Adonai, ki gamal alai.
Our service continues on page 131.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah, Shem Adonai, Hallelujah, Avdei Adonai, Shomdim b'veit Adonai, b'chatzrot beit Eloheinu. Beit Yisrael, Baruch Hu et Adonai, Beit Harun, Baruch Hu et Adonai, Beit HaLevi, Baruch Hu et Adonai, Yirei Adonai, Baruch Hu et Adonai, Baruch Adonai Mitziyahon, Shechein Yerushalayim, Hallelujah.
Please rise.
Hodu l'Adonai ki tov, ki li'olam chasdo, Hodu le'Elohei Elohim, ki li'olam chasdo, Hodu ladonei adonim, ki liolam chazdo, ve'osei niflot gedolot levado, ki liolam chazdo, ve'osei shemayim bituna. Amakim Mitzrayim, Ozer Yam Suf, Sorim. Usikon Melech Amriel, Melech Abashan. Shebeshif Lenu Zachar Lanu, Kilio Lam Chazdo, Vayifrakenu, Mitzorenu, Kilio Lam Chazdo, Note Lechem Lechol Basar, Kilio Lam Chazdo, Odule El Hashamayim, Kilio Lam Chazdo.
You may be seated.
Rananut Sadikim Baronai, Laisharim Navati La, Olanai Bifino, Mendeva Samrolo, Shirelo Shem. Nafshenu Hiktaladonai as Renu Maginenu, who Kivo Yismach Libenu Kivashem Kodsho Vatachnu, Yehi Chastachadonai Aleinu, Kasher Yichaunu La, Mizmor Shirli Yom HaShabbat, Tovlo Dot Ladonai Lizamilashim Kolo, Nagi Baboker Hastecha Bemunot Kapale Lot. Tzadik katamar yifrach eres balvanon yiske shetulim bevet Adonai b'chatzrot Eloheinu yafrichu o dunupim b'seva deshenim v'rananim iyu yagid ki asher Adonai suriv lav latavo Adonai malak yudlavesh. Mikol lot ma'im rabim adirim mishbereyam adir bamarom Adonai edotecha nemnu ma'od levetcha navakodesh Adonai leorech yamim yehi chavod Adonai leolam yismach Adonai b'masav yishem Adonai b'varach mi'atav olam b'zrach shemesh. V'urach michaper vom v'lo yashrit v'hir bat lehashiva po v'lo yir kol chambato Adonai Hoshia HaMelech Anenu v'yom kareinu Ashrei Oshvei Veitecha Od Halucha Selah Ashrei Ha'am Shekach Alo Ashrei Ha'am Shadonai Elohav. Tilat Adonai deber pi vivorech kol basar shem kodsho leolam va'ed va'anachnu nevarech yaha me'ata v'ad olam. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. Nafshi et Adonai. Adonai my curse, Adonai Bokeach, Ifrim Adonai Zakif, Ifrim Adonai Tzakikim, Adonai Shomer et Geirim, Yatam V'amana V'yaded V'derech Shayim Ya'aved, Yimloch Adonai Leolam Elohai Tziohon, the Dor Vador, Hallelujah, Hallelujah, ki tov zamra Eloheinu, ki na'im navati la. Bonei Yisraelim, Adonai nitchei Yisrael, yechanei sarofi. Nothing shall Magid v'rav Yaakov chukav umishpatav Yisrael lo asachen l'kol goy umishpatim bayeda'um. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah et Adonai min hashamayim, hallelujah bamrobim. Baruch Antula Hotzkenim Nearim Hallelujah Shem Adonai Kinis Kaf Shemo Levado Hodu Al Eretz Shamayim Vayarem Keren Lamoti Lo Lechol Chasidav Livnei Yisrael Am Karovo. Hallelujah, Hallelujah. Shir Adonai Shechadash Tilato Bichal Chasidim Yismach Yisrael Belsav Menetzion Yakilum Malka. Lesor machehem bezikim benich bedehem v'chavlei barzel laasot bahem mishpat katuv hadar hu l'chol chasidav. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah el bikodsho, hallelujah birkiauzo, hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah, betziltzalei shama. Hallelujah, hallelujah, betziltzalei trua. Kohan shama te hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Kohan shama te hallelujah. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Baruch Adonai le'olam v'amen. Baruch Adonai mitzion shchein Yerushalayim. Hallelujah. Baruch Adonai Elohim, Elohi Yisrael, Osei Niflot, Levado, Uvaruch Shen Kavodo Liolaham, V'Yamalei Chavodo Et Kol Haaretz. Amen v'amen.
We rise on the top of page 142.
Vayavarach David et Adonai le'nei kol hakahal vayomer David. Baruch atah Adonai Elohi Tzavinu. Atahu Adonai Elohim asher becharta be'Avram v'hotzeto mirkazdim v'samta shemo Avraham v'matzata et levavo ne'eman lefanecha v'charoti mohabri latet et eretz hakanani hachiti ha'emori ha'prizi ha'yevusi ha'gergashi latet lizarov. Bayam bakata lifneim ve'evru betoch bayam ve'yavashav ve'rod ve'hem ishlach labim tzolot kmo even b'mayim azim. Vayosh Adonai bayam hahu et Yisrael miyad Mitzrayim vaya Yisrael et Mitzrayim beit al sfat hayam vaya Yisrael et hayad hagadola asher asa Adonai b'Mitzrayim. Vayiru ha'am et Adonai, vayaminu b'Adonai, Moshe avdo. Az yashir Moshe b'nei Israel, et hashir azot Adonai vayimru lemor. V'hashir Adonai gasus v'rafon. There's no ratila, to say fell. Oh, Kukoshwetan Antipon. I have on Candida. Adonai lo Cleolaham Fa'ed. Hiladonai Hamalucha Moshel Bagoyim Valu Moshim Behartzion Lishbot Tari Sahav Baheta Ladonai Hamalucha Behaya Adonai Lamelach Kol Haaretz Bayom Hahu Yadonai Echad Ushmo Echad Nishmat Kol Chai Tivarech Et Shimcha Adonai Eloheinu. Ilafinu Malay Shiraka Yaham Osanenu Rinam Kamon Galav. Mitzrayim Gal Tanu Adonai Elohim Beit Avadim Tanu. Me yit melach me yishvelach me arachlach ayal agadol hagibor vehanora elayon konei shamayim va'aretz na'alelecha neshabechecha v'erecha v'rechet shem kodshecha ka'amur l'David barchi nafshi et Adonai v'chol kravai et shem kodsho ha'el b'tatu motu zecha Agadol bichvod shemecha, Hagibor lanetzach v'hanora b'nora otecha, Hamelech hayoshev al kisei ram v'nisa.
Yishar Koach to Ron. We're on page 147. For those who are joining us by streaming, I want to let you know that the PDFs of the Lev Shalom are on the homepage of Beth Israel. So if you're like, I have my Sim Shalom at home, but I want to be on the right page, rather than just giving both sets of page numbers throughout the service, again, we have the PDFs of the Lev Shalom available on bethisrael-aa.org so that you can follow along with correct page numbers. But maybe for the last time, I'll say, if you're still using your Sim Shalom, you're on 105. And the rest of us in the Lev Shalom, we're on page 147 in the middle.
Shochen ad maharam v'kadosh shema. If yisharim tithalal, u'divrei tzadikim titbarach, u'vilshon chasidim titramam, u'v'kerev kedoshim titkadash, u'v'makalot revivot l'mechaved Yisrael. Shekain chovat kol hayitzurim lefanecha Adonai Eloheinu v'Elahei Avotenu lehodot lehalel leshabech lefoer leramem lehader levarech lealeu lekales al kol divrei shira v'tishbechot David ben Yishai avdecha meshichecha.
Please rise.
Yishtabach shimcha lahad malkeinu. Rachot v'hodot me'ataviad olam baruch atah Adonai el melech gadol batishpachot el hahodot adon haniflaot habocher b'shirei zimra melech el cheolamim yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah ve'almad yivrach yirutei v'emlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yamechon v'chayedecha beit Yisrael Ba'agala uvizman kariv emru amen. Yehesh merabah mevarach leolam leomeo maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh V'yit hadar, v'yit alev, v'yit halal shmei kudusha b'rechu. Le'elamin kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechamata. Da'ami ran be'alma v'imruhu. Amen. Baruch hu et Adonai hamavorach. Baruch Adonai hamavorach le'olam va'ed.
We're seated in page 150.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam yotzer or uvarech choshech oseh shalom uvarech et hakol. Ein ke'erkech Adonai Eloheinu ba'olam hazeh v'yein zulat kama keinu l'chayei ha'olam haba efes biltecha go aleinu limot hamashiach v'yein do melech hamashiachenu l'tchiat hametim el adon al kol hamasim Baruch umvorach b'fi kol neshama gadlo b'tuvo mahalei olam da'atu tvuna sovev imoto hamid gael chayot hakodesh v'nehedar b'chavod ha'merkava zechut umishor lifnei chisa chesed v'rachamim l'nei prikodo Tovi me'orot shebara Eloheinu Yitzaharam bedat bevina upaskel Koach ugvura natan bahem Lihiot moshrim bekerev tevel Meleim ziv umfikim noga Noe haziv amecha ha'olam Semechim b'tzeitam v'sasim bevoam Osim be'yei maritzon konam, Pierre v'chavod nahotnim lishma, Sahala verina lezecher malchuta, Kara l'shemesh v'yizrachor, Raha v'hitkin surat havana, Shevach nahotnim lo, Kol tzivah maharon, Tiferet ugedula, Serafim ve'ofanim ve'chayot hakodesh, La'el asher shavat mikol asim. Baruch Sureinu Malkeinu v'go aleinu. Kulam ahovim, kulam berurim, kulam giborim, v'kulam osim ba'ima uv'yiraret son konam, v'kulam pochim et pihem b'kedusha v'tahara, v'shira v'zimra, umvarchim umshabachim, umfarim umaritzim, umakdishim umamlichim, et shem ha'el ha'melech ha'gadol. V'chulam mekablim aleihem all malchut shamayim zeh mizeh v'notnim reshut zeh lazeh lahakdish liot ram benachat ruach v'safa v'rura uvenima kedosha kulam ki acharonim ve'omrim be'yira kadosh 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 Adonai tzivahot melech haaretz kevodo. V'haofanim v'chayot hakodesh v'rosh gadol mitnasim liumat serafim liumatam mishavim v'yomrim Baruch kavod Adonai mimkom. Or chadash al Tzion ta'ihir V'nizkechu lanu meheira le'oro, Baruch atah Adonai yotzer ha'meorot.
As we work our way down 154, we're preparing for the Shema on the next page.
V'havienu l'shalom me'arba kanfot haaretz, v'tolichenu kama miyut le'artzenu, ki el poel Yeshua ata uvanu v'acharta mikol am v'lashon, v'keraftanu l'shimcha hagadol sela be'emet, l'hodot l'cha yachedcha b'ahava, baruch atah Adonai, habocher b'yamo Yisrael b'ahava. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, b'chol levavcha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha, v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele, asher anochi mitzavecha, Hayom alevavecha, v'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, v'shiftecha b'veitecha, uvlechtecha havaderech, uv'shokbecha, uv'kumecha, uv'shartam leod al yadecha, v'hayu etotachot b'neinecha, uv'tavtam, al mezuzot beitecha, uv'hisharecha. Adonai Elohechem, amen. L'dor vador hu kayam u'shmo kayam, v'chi sonachon u'malchuto v'emunato lo ad kayam. Emet sh'atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'Elokei avotenu, Malkeinu melech avotenu, go'aleinu go'el avotenu, Yotzreinu tzur Yeshuatenu, Hodenu matzilenu me'olam shemecha, Ein Elohim zulatecha, Ezrat avotenu atahu me'olam. Tehillat le'elyon baruchum v'rach, Moshe uvnei Yisrael chanu shirah, b'simcha rabah ve'amru kulam, mi chamocha bo'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedar b'kodesh, nahora tehillat osef eleh. Shira chadasha shivku gulim l'shem kasafat hayam, yachad kulam hodu v'him lichu v'yamru, Adonai yimloch le'olam v'en. Sur Yisrael, Uma v'ezrat Yisrael, uftech nemecha Yehuda v'Yisrael, Go'aleinu Kadosh Yisrael, Baruch atah Adonai.
159 is forward.
For those still davening, please continue as the rest of us are standing on page 159 for the repetition.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora, El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol, v'Zocher Chasdei Avot, U'Mevi Goel Livnei V'neihem L'man Shemo B'Yahava, Melech Ozer Foked Moshiach U'Magen Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham U'Foked Sarah Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai Mechayim Etim Atarav Lehoshia Mechalkel Chayim B'Chesed Mechayim Etim B'Rachamim Rabim Somech Noflim V'Rofei Cholim U'Matir Asurim Umekayem emunato lishenei afar michamocha bal gevurot umido melach melech meimid umechayeh umatzmiach Yeshua v'ne'emanat halachayot metim Baruch atah Adonai Mechayeh hametim.
161.
Nekadesh et shem kabalam kashem shemakdishim ato b'shmei marom kakatuv al yad nebiyecha v'kaharazeh el zeh ve'amar. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Melech haaretz kevodo, az b'kol Rosh Gadol, adir v'chazak mashmim kol, mitnasim l'umat seraf bihim l'umatam baruch yomeru. Baruch kavod Adonai mimkomcha malkeinu tofia v'timloch aleinu ki mechakim anachnu lach matai timloch b'tzion bekarov be'yameinu le'olam va'ed tishkon titgadal v'titkadash b'toch Yerushalayim ircha L'dor vador l'netzach netzachim v'yeheneinu tirena malchutecha kadavar ha'amor b'shirei uzecha al yedei David Mashiach tzidkecha. Yimloch Adonai le'olam Elohayich Zion, l'dor vador, hallelujah, l'dor vador nagid godlecha, u'lenetzach netzachim kedushatcha nakdish, v'shivchacha Eloheinu mipinu lo yamush le'olam voed, ki el-melech gadol v'kadosh atah baruch atah Adonai, ha'el ha'kadosh.
We are seated as we continue on 162.
Yismach Moshe b'matnat chelko, Ki eved neman karata lo, Kol tiferet roshana tata, Ve'amdo lefanecha al har Sinai, U'shnei luchot avanim horid biyado, Ve'chatu b'hem shemirat Shabbat, Ve'chein katuv b'toratecha, Ve'shamru b'nei Yisrael hashabat ladsot et hashabat l'dorotam berit olam, Ve'ni u'vein b'nei Yisrael ti le'olam, Ki sheshet yamim asa Adonai et hashamayim v'et haaretz, Uvayom hashvi shavat vayinachash. V'lo nitata Adonai Eloheinu legoyei haratzot. V'lo hinchata malkeinu le'avdei fisilim. V'gam b'mnuchato le'yiskenu arelim. Ki li'Yisrael chanatato le'bi'ahavaha. Le'zera Yaakov asher bam b'acharta. Amakad Sheshvi, Kulam Yisbu Vitangu Metuvecha, Vahashvi Ratita Bo Vikidashto, Chemdat Yamimoto Karata, Zecher Lamase Vereshit, Eloheinu Velahevotenu, Ritzevim Nukatenu, Kodshenu B'mitzvotecha V'ten Kokenu B'toratecha, Sabenu Mituvecha V'samchenu B'shuatecha, V'taher Libeinu Le'avdecha Be'emet, V'hanchi Leinu Adonai Eloheinu B'ahava Uvratzon Shabbat Kodshecha, Ve'anuchu V'yisrael Mekadshei Shemecha, Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh HaShabbat. Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu b'amcha Yisrael v'tfilatam, v'hashevet havadat le'dvir beitecha, u'tfilatam b'ahava tekabel b'ratzon, u'tihi l'ratzon tamid avodat Yisrael amecha, v'techazenu eineinu b'shuvcha l'tzion b'rachamim, Baruch atah Adonai, Hamachazir Shechinato L'Tzion Modim Anachnu La. Atov kilo chalu rachamecha v'hamrachem kilo tamu chasadecha me'olam ki vihinu lach v'al kulam yitbarach v'yitramam shemcha makenu tamid le'olam v'ohed v'chol hachayim yoducha salah v'hallelu et shemcha be'emet ha'el yeshuateinu v'ezrateinu salah Baruch atah Adonai hatov shemecha l'chano elehodot Eloheinu v'elahevotenu barcheinu v'abracha hamshulashet b'Torah haktuva al yedei Moshe avdecha ha'amura mipi Aharon uvanahav kohanim hamkedoshecha kamor yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichunecha Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom Sim shalom tov avracha chen v'chesed b'rachamim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael amecha Barcheinu avinu kulanu ke'echa be'or panecha Ki be'or panecha natata lanu Adonai Eloheinu Torah chaim ve'ahavat chesed ve'ahavat chesed Utzdaka uveracha rachamim v'chaim v'shalom v'rachamim v'chaim v'chaim v'shalom v'tov beinecha levarech et amecha Yisrael B'chol eit u'b'chol shah b'shlomecha baruch atah Adonai hamvorech et amo Yisrael b'shalom
167.
Yitkara v'yitkara shemei rabbah ve'amad yivrach yirutei ve'emlich malchutei v'chayechonu v'yamechonu v'chayedechol beit Yisrael v'agala u'vizman kariv ve'imru amen Yehi shmei rabbah mevorach le'olam yomei omaya yitbarach v'yishtabach Yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yitalev v'yitala shmei d'kudesha v'richu Le'ela min kol berachata v'shirata tishbachata v'nechamata da'amiran ve'ama ve'imru amen Titkabas v'ladhon v'udhon dechol Yisrael Kodam avahon devishamaya ve'imru amen Yehi shlama rava min shemaya v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen Oseh shalom b'mrama v'yaseh shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen
We turn back to page 112 for the Psalm for Shabbat.
Yom Yom Shabbat Kodesh Ojinuvun beseva deshenim vrananim yihu lehagik yashar Adonai tzuri v'lavlat haba.
Shakoah. Mourner's Kaddish for those who are reciting today can be found on page 121. Yikadal v'yikadash shemei rabba, v'yalma divra kirute v'yamlich machute, v'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala uvizman kari v'imru amen. Yehe shmei rabba mevarach le'olam ulamei almaya. Yiparach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitale v'yitalal shmei kudesha brichu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata. Tushbechata v'nechemata. Da'amiran v'ama v'imru. Amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. V'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom v'mromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu v'al kol Yisrael. V'imru. Amen. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome to Parshat Ki Tetzei Shabbat and Lev Shalem Shabbat, and a wonderful beginning September Shabbat of, not the first one, but a September Shabbat of this year. I ask you to turn to page 168. I'm going to invite up John at this time. We begin the Torah service.
Ein kamocha ve'elohim Adonai ve'ein kama'asecha. Malchutecha malchut olamim u'memshaltecha be'odor Adonai melech Adonai malach Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed Adonai hos'amo yiteh Adonai yivarech et amo v'shalom Achar rachamim et yirat yirtzon ha'et Zion Tivnei Chomot Yerushalayim Tivnei Chomot Yerushalayim Kirecha v'charbatachu Melech Elam v'Yisrael
As we sing on page 170, you're also welcome to personally pray what is on 169 or 170. Bottom of page 170.
Kadisha,
171 as the curtain is closed.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai,
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Echad Eloheinu, Gadol Adonenu, Kadosh Shemo.
Gadol Adonai iti, Unevrom ma Shemo Yachdav.
V'hagevura, v'hatiferet, v'hanetzach, v'hahod, ki o b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, ki o b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. Adonai Eloheinu, ve'ishtachavu, ve'ishtachavu, Ve'ishtachavu behar kodsho ikadosh 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 Adonai Eloheinu. You can get that. We may be seated. It's an honor to have Patty here, leader of her congregation in Kalamazoo. I hope everyone gets a chance to greet her in the short time we have with her here in Ann Arbor. Thank you. I'll have Deborah find her place. It's going to be. Yep, we do. I can lend you a hand. We're going to be beginning the Torah portion of Kitetse on page 1130 in the Red Book. Okay, that was my big joke for the day. And I just see it just landed perfectly, just as I was hoping. So, okay, now we have two red books. I wore a red tie. You can see how colorblind I am because I tried to match it to the book. And well, I think one of those lines maybe matches. So we are now in possession of two red books, which somehow also complement and match the upholstery of the congregation. And so we're going with the theme. So as we use our new Lev Shalem, I invite you at the same time, well, I'll talk about it later. The Torah is out, so we will start reading it. Again, we're on page 1130 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash. We're in chapter 24 of Devarim, starting with verse 14. I call up our Kohen or Bat Kohen. Yazor v'yagim v'yoshil l'chasam bo v'nomar amen. Hakol v'leinu nukavod la'Torah. Our Kohen. It's me. Whoa, that's a nice honor. Matt, would you say Ya'amod? Oh my gosh, I have my Hebrew name like written into my old Siddur so that I can always hand it over, but now I don't. So I will tell you my Hebrew name. Harav Nadav Noach.
Ya'amod Harav Nadav Noach
Ben Devorah.
Ben Devorah
Harav Yitzchak HaKohen.
Harav Yitzchak HaKohen.
Baruch Shenatan Torah Le'amo Yisrael B'Kedushato. V'atem hadbekim b'Adonai Elohechem Chayim Kulechem Hayom. Baruch et Adonai Haborach. Baruch Adonai Haborach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch et Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch et Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. לא תשוק שכיר עני ואביון מאחיך ומגרך אשר בארצך בשעריך ביומו תיתן שכרו ולא תבוא עליו השמש כי עני הוא ואליו הוא נושא את נפשו ולא יקרא לך אדוני והיה בך חטא לא ימתו אבות על בנים ובנים לא ימתו על אבות איש בחטאו יומת.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu torat emet b'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. We call up our Levi or our Bat Levi. Ya'amod Ze'ev B'Dina ve'Aharon HaLevi. We're continuing with verse 17.
Baruch Adonai Hambrach,
Baruch Adonai Borach L'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hambrach Le'olam Va'ed, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher bachar banu mikol hamim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
אמן. לא תטה משפט יתום ולא תחבול בגד אלמנה וזכרת כי עבד היית במצרים ויפתח אדוני אלוהיך משם על כן אנוכי מצווך לעשות את הדבר הזה כי תקצור קצירך בשדך ושכחת עומר בשדה לא תשוב לקחתו לגר ליתום ולאלמנה יהיה למען יברכך אדוני אלוהיך בכל מעשה ידיך.
Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Yeshar Koach. We call up our Shlishi. Ya'amod. Abraham ben Chaim v'Bluma la'aliyah ha'shlishit.
Baruch Adonai Hamborach.
Baruch Adonai Borach L'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'nasan lanu et Toraso. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
אמן. כי תחת זיתך לא תפאר אחריך לגר ליתום ולאלמנה יהיה כי תבצור כרמך לא תעולה אחריך לגר ליתום ולאלמנה יהיה וזכרת כי עבד היית בארץ מצרים על כן אנוכי מצווך לעשות את הדבר הזה.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher nasan lanu toras emes v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yeshar Koach. Our Rivi'i, our fourth Aliyah. Ya'amod. Yosef ben Chaim, Aliyah HaRevi'it.
Baruch Adonai Barak.
Baruch Adonai Borach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Barak Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Chapter 25 of Deuteronomy.
Amen. כי יריב בין אנשים וניגשו אל המשפט ושפטום והצדיקו את הצדיק והרשיעו את הרשע והיה אם הן חכות הרשע והפילו השופט ויקהו לפניו כדי רשעתו במספר הבאים יכנו לא יוסיף, פן יוסיף להכותו עליהם הכרה רבה, ונקרא אחיך לעיניך, לא תחסום שור בדישו.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam atah b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Michael takes his place from Deborah as we continue with our fifth aliyah. Yosef ben Chaim, aliyah hamishit. We'll be continuing on page 1133 of the Chumash.
Baruch Adonai Hamekolam.
Baruch Adonai Borach Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamekolam Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Yeshvu achim yachdav u'me'et achad mehem uvein en lo tiyeh eshet chamed chachutza le'ish zar yibama yavo alecha l'kacha lo leisha v'yibma v'haya habachor asher teled yakum al shem achiv hamet Below Yimacheh Shemo me Yisrael, Bimlo Yakbos Ha'ish Lakachat et Yevinto, Bela Belta Yevinto Hashara Alaskenim Bamra Mein Yivami Mein Yavmi Lahakim Lachishem Yisrael. Lo ava yami bakaru lo zikne iro bibibru elav bama bamar lo hapatsi lakakta'a niksha'a yevinto elav lene askenim chalsa'ana lo me'al raglo yarkab befanav be'anta'a bamra'a kacha yasela ish Asher lo yivne et beit achi v'nikra shemo b'Yisrael beit chaluz hana.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah emet v'chayei olam atah b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yeshua. And we're heading down because we're in the red zone at this time, but we allow some flexibility. And our Shishi, Larry's going to take his place from Michael, and Matt's going to point it out if as we call up our sixth aliyah. And we're continuing on page 1134, which is chapter 25, verses 11 through 16.
Baruch Adonai Borach
Le'olam Va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Borach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam אשר בחר בנו מכל העמים ונתן לנו את תורתו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen.
אמן. כי ינצו אנשים יחדיו, איש ואחיו וקרבה, וקרבה אישה, אשת האחד להציל את אישה מיד מכהו, ושלחה ידה והחזיקה במפושיו, וקצותה את כפה, לא תחוס עיניך, לא יהיה לך בכיסך אבן ואבן גדולה וקטנה, לא יהיה לך בביתך איפה ואיפה גדולה וקטנה, אבן שלמה והצדק יהיה לך, יהיה לך איפה שלמה והצדק יהיה לך, למען יאריכו ימיך על האדמה אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך, כי תועבת אדוני אלוהיך כל עושה אלה, כל עושה עוול.
Nicely done, Larry.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר נתן לנו תורת אמת וחיי עולם נטע בתוכנו. ברוך אתה אדוני נותן התורה.
Amen. Yeshua kol chechem. And our next Torah reader is coming forward, Jerry. A little foreshadowing of what's to come. And our sixth Aliyah, our Shishi, is invited up at this time. Sorry, our Shvi'i. Or your Shvi'i? No.
No, there's the.
Yay! And as the Mishpacha comes forward, Ya'amdu.
Or about Shmuel Gedalia.
You can see the executive function at work. Ya'amdu.
Or about Shmuel Gedalia.
Or about Shmuel Gedalia
Shoshana.
Shoshana.
Meir Elisheva bat Ora bat Gershon Aryeh.
That.
Sarakin, but where's the Gershon?
Sarvan Haba Ora Gershom. La'aliyah hashvi'id. Wonderful to have you on the beam. Don't be scared of the Torah reader. He's nice.
He's terrifying. He's scary. Okay, ready? Baruch Hu Adonai Hambarach.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach.
Baruch Adonai Hambarach Le'olam Va'ed. Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim V'natan Lanu Et Torato. Baruch Atah Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
אמן. זכור את אשר עשה לך עמלק בדרך בצאתכם ממצרים, אשר כוחה בדרך, ויזנב בך כל הנחשלים אחריך, ואתה עייף ויגע, ולא ירא אלוהים. בהניח אדוני אלוהיך לך מכל אויביך מסביב, בארץ אשר אדוני אלוהיך נותן לך נחלה לרשתה, תמחה את זכר עמלק מתחת השמיים, לא תשכח.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Don't go anywhere just yet. We're going to cover the scroll before the Maftir reading. So as we covered, it gives us a perfect opportunity. And so Jerry, I know you were somewhat surprised by who showed up this weekend, and would you mind at this time introducing us to your family?
Sure. This is my wife, Claire Chapnick, and my younger daughter, Phoebe, and my older daughter, Sasha. I knew Phoebe was coming. She just got back from a birthright trip to Israel and stopped here on her way back to school. But Sasha, who lives in Washington, appeared at the airport yesterday, so that was a nice surprise.
Well, very, very, very much welcome to our congregation. And also there are a lot of people also streaming, so I'm glad they got a chance to see you. I take it as a very good sign that, like, I could be wrong because of the mask, But I thought during your father's reading that there was a little bit of sort of smiling and laughing going on. And I feel that's a really good sign of a spirit within a
Yeah, well,
family.
the other thing to note is that this parasha was Sasha's bat mitzvah parasha.
You're on from off
So
to.
well, he
So
just did it.
last night when she appeared at my apartment, I said, you could read the seventh aliyah, and she could have, but it wouldn't have been up to her standards. She hadn't practiced.
I know we don't leave things to that last minute, and maybe that's why the arrival was unannounced. But very much welcome. And you know, if we ever need to give your father a hard time, I hope I can contact you and find out, you know, where to push and what buttons to press and where to, you know. And we hope that we hope that. So for the time that you're in Ann Arbor, that it's a happy time. We hope to really welcome you to our wonderful town. Ann Arbor is really not like any other place in the world, and we hope that we get a chance. I know
Like
that
I was saying.
so we hope that you'll find a familiarity and also a newness that is rewarding.
Yeah, we're excited to be here.
Thank you. I'm going to do the blessing for healing, and I want you to be comfortable. If you want to stay together as a family, that's fine. If you'd rather return to your seat, I can understand that as well. I'm going to ask for names of those in need of healing at the appropriate time. If you're looking for, by the way, this is a good time to mention it, which is that really worked hard to make the debut. I worked hard to make the debut of Lev Shalem Shabbat, that we also have a guide to the service to go with it. And we have so many wonderful explanations and new perspectives going on in the Siddur, but there are also things that are going on all the time that are not discussed in the Siddur. And I thought that as we're expanding our way of really navigating our own prayer services potentially differently. In other words, for those who are saying, I'm looking for my prayer to become new, I'm looking for new experiences, it doesn't have to be the same every time, then now we have ways. I'm gonna read the margins this time, or I'm gonna think of the prayer in a different way because it told me who wrote it now in the Siddur. And another way to experience prayer is I wanna give a full panoply. So this becomes like a culture of prayer at Beth Israel, a continuing culture of prayer with new kinds of ways. So we have descriptions of why we do things the way we do. We have descriptions of why I do things the way we do. We have a description, for example, if you look in the table of contents, it'll say Mishaberach prayer for those in need of healing, page 13. So if you're like, I wonder why they're doing it that way, you can turn to page 13 and you'll find my explanation of why we're doing things this way. And it has notes of other kinds. And for those who are really, they're saying today, I'm gonna like dip my toe in kavanot. Kavanot are what is going on in your mind when you're praying. It's your kavanah, sometimes translated intentions, but it's the thoughts that are in your da'at, in your consciousness during the prayer, in addition to the words. And so some people choose, and this is a centuries, millennia old tradition of picking a direction for those thoughts even as the words are happening, and focusing on that direction. So I've listed kavanot at the back. And so if you look to page 20, I actually have in italics kavanot that go with each, with not every single prayer, but with several of the prayers. So for those who are learning the prayers, it says a little bit about what this page is about and thoughts that you could think during it. I won't surprise you to learn that they're all thoughts that I use. So they're basically my kavanot or a few of my kavanot that I chose to share. So if you're ever wondering why we're doing different practices, at least look at the table of contents. And it gives you, this will always be in the pews. And especially if you're ever bringing guests to Beth Israel, you can tell them, you could probably learn a lot. If people are like, I don't know any Hebrew, or say, you can really get a lot just by following with the pages in the back of the guide that we have in the pews. And so with that, it'll tell you how we do the Mishaberach, and we'll continue with that at this time. Mishaberach Avoteinu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah u'yivarech u'virapeh et Mayim Shira bat Chaya Elisheva, David ben Avra Bavaloria, Sam Silver, Yehuda Aharon ben Eliezer b'Tzipora, Devora Aviva bat Yitzchak v'Esther, Judith Elkin, Azriel Shel Shlomit, Naomi bat Shlomit, Shalom Zev ben Moshe, Yefifia bat Yosef Yehudit, and I saw you last night, Meir ben Hillel v'Blum Abbas, Yudo Shlama ben Avram Yitzchak v'Rochel, Chaya bat Hasna Rochel v'Shmuel David, Asher Menachem Shlomo Isaacs, I'm looking back forward to when you're back in the pew in your normal spot. Vet kol hacholim ve'et.
Very nice.
Shoshana Batana, Speed, and Reza, and Stasik.
וכל החולים בגילה קדושה, הקדוש ברוך הוא ימלא רחמים עליהם, להחזיקם רפותם וישלח להם מהרה רפואה שלמה מן השמיים, רפואת הנפש ורפואת הגוף בתוך שחלי ישראל, שבת ימי לזעוק את רק רבה לבוא, השתה בעגלה בזמן קריב ונאמר, Amen. May they experience a full and speedy recovery in body and also in spirit. Yitkada v'yitkada shemei rabba v'yalma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon u'vyomechon u'chayei dechol beit Yisrael b'agala b'zman kariv v'imeru Yehei shmei rabba mevarach v'yalam u'lam me'amaya Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramam v'yinaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei d'kudesha leila min kol berchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata damiran v'yalma v'imeru Amen. Yamod
Gershon Aryeh ben Tzvi
Gershon Aryeh ben Tzvi V'Leah Hamaftir.
Baruch et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek b'derech b'tzekchem mimitzrayim. Asher kocha b'derech v'yezanev b'cha kol hanechashalim acharecha ve'ata ayef v'yagea v'lo yareh Elohim v'haya b'haniach Adonai Elohecha lecha mikol oivecha misaviv ba'aretz asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha nachala l'rishta timche et zecher Amalek mitachat hashamayim lo tishkach. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yeshua Koach. We call up our lifter and our roller at this time. Ya'amdu lag b'ha v'likli la. Vezot Torah asher sa Moshe lifnei b'nei Yisrael al pi Adonai b'yad Moshe. Taim hi. Machazikim ba v'tomchem me'usha derachem darkei noam v'chol nedivotecha shalom was going to say, let's do the middle strong, but it didn't quite fit. And as the Torah is seated, so too we may be seated. I call up Deborah Ball, President of the congregation.
We're talking about this.
Yeah.
Shabbat Shalom. It's really my honor and my pleasure to formally welcome Jerry Sarakin as our new Executive Director of Beth Israel Congregation. I think many of you know that for the last 2.5, almost 3 years, we've been managing without an executive director. That may be more or less apparent to some of you, but to people like Beth Jarvis and Rabbi Kane and Michelle Israel and Sam Zielinski, it's been pretty evident about the way the work that an executive director does for a synagogue has been managed by people who already have full jobs. So I want to begin this by saying thank you so much to all the people who are carrying that load, and also many members of the board who did things that are really not their responsibility, and they probably need to step back a bit and let our staff do the professional work that they do. But I want to thank all of those. I also really want to thank the search committee, so chaired by Steve Klein and included members, I don't want to forget anybody, Liz Arnkoff, Beth Dwoskin, Mark Daskin, Robin Axelrod, Jason Schwab, Marnie Jacobson, and Aaron Willis. This was a very major search, a national search with a search firm. I think many of you know that. And we were fortunate to recruit a terrific pool. And from that pool, we were extremely fortunate to recruit and hire Jerry Sarakin. And we're so glad that you're here. Jerry comes to us from Iowa City, Iowa, where he directed Hillel in the community for almost 20 years. He also was the director, after concluding that role, was the director of a Talmud Torah day school in Edmonton, Canada. I hope that's right. So he brings a wide range of professional experience. He's also a political scientist by training, and I think that Jeff Bernstein would probably affirm that political science is a terrific background for almost anything about institutions and organizations, right, Jeff? So that background, in addition to what you've just seen, is his terrific background in Judaic studies and Hebrew and ritual, is a terrific asset to our congregation. So we're incredibly happy to be welcoming him today. Also so glad that Claire and Sasha and Phoebe can be with us for this moment. It's not quite as bar mitzvah, but it is an important event. It's not an installation either, but it is an important moment for us as a community. And there are many people to thank for getting to this point and for managing through what has been a very difficult 3 years to live without an executive director. And I can say that as the president, I'm already breathing big sighs of relief, many days about what it feels like to have a professional in addition to our staff. And I'm sure that Rabbi Kane feels similarly, and as does Beth. So with a really just warm welcome to you, Jerry. We're so glad that you're here. I hope many of you will have opportunities to get to know Jerry, to meet him today if you haven't already, and to join us for a special kiddush in his honor after services today. So welcome, Jerry.
Oh, the kippah, yes. Well, I'll explain the kippah in a second. Yeah.
What are they going to explain?
I'm not sure.
I think there's some people in Iowa City who would be surprised to see like no Hawkeye on your.
No, I know. And
as a person who has a lot of affiliation with Iowa City, I'm worried about this rep, but you have a degree from.
I do have a degree from here. And so I have a new kippah that Phoebe just got back. As I said, she was on a birthright trip just this past 10 days. And I guess she went to the kippah store in Jerusalem on Ben Yehuda Street and got me a probably not officially licensed Michigan kippah just in time. This matches the probably not officially licensed Wash U kippah that Sasha gave me a couple of years ago that I sometimes wear to work. So if you're ever on Ben Yehuda Street in Jerusalem, you can get a kippah from plenty of professional sports teams and universities, and I don't think anybody's getting any royalties. Couple of things about today's Haftarah. This is the Haftarah, the fifth of 7 Haftarot of consolation that are chanted between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah. Most of the year when we chant a Haftarah on Shabbat, the theme of the Haftarah reflects what's been read in the Torah. And actually, today's reading is sort of interesting. You'll notice it's at the end of it, there's the last 2 verses, verse 9 and mostly, but also verse 10, talk about Noah and the flood. So we actually use the same Haftarah at Parashat Noach, which will be coming up in 6 or 8 weeks. And that makes sense because it talks about Noah. But during the period between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, we're instead focusing on our personal process of moving into repentance. And all of these haftarot that we do this time of year come from the late chapters of Isaiah, Deutero-Isaiah, the second Isaiah. And in fact, today we're doing something a little bit strange, which is that we're reading the fifth Haftarah followed by the third Haftarah. Normally, 2 weeks ago on Parashat Re'eh, we would have read the verses that come immediately after the 10 verses of this very short Haftarah, but because it was Rosh Chodesh 2 weeks ago, that got preempted. And so I'm going to ask everybody to flip over at the end of verse 10 to, I don't know what page number, the page number where the Haftarah for Re'eh is, and we're going to continue reading from there. So the theme for the Haftarah for Ki Tetzeh is about, it starts out with Isaiah talking about childless women and that they should rejoice. Well, why should a childless woman rejoice? And who is the childless woman he's talking about? The childless woman that Isaiah is referring to is the land of Israel. And the rejoicing is because the people are returning. And so that's the metaphor that begins this Haftarah. And then we go in to talk about Noah and about how God makes a promise. The implications, God makes a promise never to destroy the world again at the end of the flood. That's the rainbow story. And Isaiah is reminding the people that even in the aftermath of disaster, we're not going to be completely wiped out. And so I was trying to figure out how to talk about this, and I did a little Google search and came across a poem written by a friend of mine. I didn't know he had written this poem. His name is Rick Lupert. He used to be a Hillel professional. That's how I know him. He's a poet and musician. And he published this, I think, 4 or 5 years ago. And he calls it, They've Got Pants Just for Floods, a poem for Haftarah Ki Tetzeh. So I thought instead of my pontificating, I'm going to read Rick's poem here. Promises are easy to forget when the promiser has hidden their face. This is why sometimes we wear pants that are too short in case Noah's flood comes again, despite the occasional rainbow reminder. It's a fear we've taken so seriously, you'll find hundreds of results on Amazon if you search for flood pants. I'm glad someone's making money off our lack of faith. We're told God's wrath was only there for a moment as we wept on the wrong side of the Babylonian border. But a biblical moment is long enough for an entire generation to die out in the desert. For riverside city after riverside city to have to appeal to FEMA for post-rain relief. For millions to die at the hands of people with radical ideas, it's easy to see why we sometimes feel forgotten. We've got 2 more weeks of divine consolation before the cycle begins again. Don't hide your face from us. Just a glimpse will keep us in line. So the Haftarah begins on page 1138.
Right, it begins on 1138, and for the next Haftarah, for the second part, we'll be back to the 1085. 1086.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nviim tovim v'ratza v'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'Torah uv'Moshe avdo Yisrael amo, uvinviei ha'emet v'tzedek. Rani akara lo yalada, pitzchi rina v'tzali lo chala, ki rabim b'nei shomema, b'nei ve'ula, amar Adonai, harchivi Mekomo alech גביריות משכנותייך יטו אל תחסוכי העריכי מיתרייך ותדותייך חזקי כי ימין ושמאל תפרוצי וזרעך גויים יירש וערים נשמות יושיבו אל תראי כי לא תבושי ואל תקלמי כי לא תחפירי כי בושת אלומייך תשכחי בחרפת אלמנותייך לא תזכרי עוד כי בוא עלייך עושייך אדוני צבאות שמו וגואלך קדוש ישראל אלוהי כל הארץ יקרא כי כאישה עזובה ועצובת רוח קראך אדוני ואשת נעורים כי תימאר אמר אלוהיך ברגע קטון עזבתיך וברחמים גדולים אקבצך בשצף קצף הסתרתי פני רגע ממך ובחסד עולם ריחמתיך אמר גואלך אדוני כי מנוח זאת לי אשר נשבעתי מעבוד מנוח עוד על הארץ כן נשבעתי מקצוף עלייך ומגרבך כי ההרים ימושו והגבעות תמותנה וחסדי מאיתך לא ימוש וברית שלומי לא תמות אמר מרחמך אדוני אני הסוהרה לא נוחמה הנה אנוכי מביט בפוך אבנייך וסדתיך בספירים ושמתיך הדקות שמשותייך ושערייך לאבני אקדח וכל גבולך לאבני חפץ וכל בנייך לימודי אדוני ורב שלום בנייך בצדקה תכונני רחקי מעושק כי לא תיראי וממחיתה כי לא תקרב אלייך הן גור יגור אפס מאותי מגר איתך עלייך יפול הנה אנוכי בראתי חרש נופח באש החם ומוציך לי למעשהו ואנוכי בראתי משחית לחבל כל כלי יוצר עלייך לא יצלח וכל לשון תקום איתך למשפט תרשיעי זאת נחלת עבדי אדוני וצדקתם מאיתי נאום אדוני אוי כל צמא לכו למים ואשר אין לו כסף לכו שברו ואכלו ולכו שברו בלא כסף ובלא מחיר יין וחלב למה תשקלו כסף בלא לחם והגיעכם בלא לשבעה שמעו שמוע אליי ואיכלו טוב ותתענג בדשן נפשכם הטו אוזניכם ולכו אליי, שמעו ותחי נפשכם, ואכרתה לכם ברית עולם, חסדי דוד הנאמנים. הן עד לאומים נתתיו, נגיד ומצווה לאומים. הן גוי לא תדע תקרא, וגוי לא ידעוך אליך ירוצו, למען אדוני אלוהיך, ולקדוש ישראל כפארך. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, צור כל העולמים, צדיק בכל הדורות, האל הנאמן, האומר ועושה, המדבר ומקיים, שכל דבריו אמת וצדק. נאמן אתה הוא אדוני אלוהינו, ונאמנים דבריך, ודבר אחד מדבריך, אחור לא ישוב ריקם, כי אל מלך נאמן ורחמן אתה, ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הנאמן בכל דבריו. רחם על ציון כי היא בית חיינו, ולעלובת נפש תושיע במהרה בימינו, ברוך אתה אדוני, משמח ציון בבניה. שמחנו אדוני אלוהינו באליהו הנביא עבדך, ובמלכות בית דוד משיחך, במהרה יבוא ויגל ליבנו, על כיסו לא ישב זר, ולא ינחלו עוד אחרים את כבודו, כי בשם קודשך נשבעת לו, שלא יכבה נרו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני מגן דוד. על התורה ועל העבודה ועל הנביאים ועל יום השבת הזה שנתת לנו אדוני אלוהינו, לקדושה ולמנוחה, לכבוד ולתפארת. על הכל אדוני אלוהינו אנחנו מודים לך ומברכים אותך, יתברך שמך בפי כל חי תמיד לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש השבת. ברוך תהיה. ברוכים תהיו.
We continue with returning the Torah with our respect to the art. We are on page 100 and I'm learning. Oh no, the months of the year. Very interesting. Okay. Interesting. Look up your zodiac. So, give me the name one more time. One for, we are at the Kumbar 176. 176 to prepare for the honor. We turn to the Ashrei on page 181.
הרוממך אלוהי למלך, ועמך שמחה לעולם ועד. גדול אדוני ומהולל מאוד, ולגדולתו אין חקר. עדה כבוד הודיך, ודברי נפלאותיך עשית. זכר רב טובך יביאו, וצדקתך ירנו. טוב אדוני לכל, ורחמיו כל מעשיו. כבוד מלכות היאמרו, וגבורתך ידברו. מלכותך מלכות כל עולמים, וממשלתך בכל דור ודור. עיניך אליך יסתרו, ואתה נותן הלחם את אוכלם בעיתו. צדיק אדוני בכל דרכיו, וחסיד בכל מעשיו.
לכל אשר יקראו בו באמת.
רצון יראיו יעשה, ואת שבתם ישמע ויושיע.
שומע אדוני אלוהיו, ואת פרשתים ישמיע.
תהילת אדוני ידבר כי, ויברך כל בשר שקודשו לעולם ועד.
ואנחנו נברך יה, מעתה ועד עולם, הללויה.
183.
יהללו את שם אדוני, כי נשגב שמו לבדו.
אורץ בשמיים, וירם קרן לימו, תהילה לכל חסידיו, לפני ישראל הקרוב.
מזמור לדוד.
אהבו לאדוני בני אלי, אהבו לאדוני כבוד ועוז, אהבו לאדוני כבוד שמו, השתחוו לאדוני בהדרת קודש.
כל אדוני על המים, אל הכבוד עירים, אדוני על מים רבים.
כל אדוני באפורה, כל אדוני באדם, כל אדוני שובר ארזים וישבר אדוני את ארזי אדוני. כל אדוני חוצב להבות אש, כל אדוני יתיל מדבר, יתיל אדוני מדבר קדש, כל אדוני יחולל איילות.
ויחסות ירוד, ובתי קנות, כולו אומר הגול.
אדוני למדות ישב וישב אדוני מלך לעולם. אדוני עוז לעמו ייתן, אדוני יברך את עמו בשלום.
$184. And before it's closed, we do Eitz Chaim P. The curtain is closed. As we turn back and remain standing, we're on page 177 for the prayer for the renewal of creation. I thought it was going to be you, Michael.
Tefillah l'shalom haaretz, ribono shel olam. A prayer for the renewal of creation. Master of the universe, in whose hand is the breath of all life and the soul of every person, grant us the gift of Shabbat, a day of rest from all our labors. With all of our senses, may we perceive the glory of your works. Fill us with your goodness, that we may attest to your great deeds. Strengthen us to become your faithful partners, preserving the world for the sake of future generations. Adonai, our God and God of our ancestors, may it be your will to renew your blessings in the world in our day, as you have done from the beginning of time.
Prayer for our country.
Our God and God of our ancestors, with mercy accept our prayer. Pour out your blessings upon this land, upon its inhabitants. God, whose spirit is in all creatures, we pray that your spirit be awakened to the inhabitants of our land. Uproot from our hearts hatred and malice, jealousy and strife. Plant love and companionship, peace and friendship among the individuals and states who dwell in our nation. Grant us the knowledge to judge justly, the wisdom to act with compassion, and the understanding and courage to run up. May it be revealed that our land be a blessing to all who dwell on it. And may we cause all peoples to dwell in friendship and freedom. Speedily fulfill the vision of your prophet. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. For all of them, from the least of them to the greatest, shall know me.
Amen. Prayer for the state of Israel on page 178. I'm going to read it myself today, if that's okay. There are actually 2.1 versions of it in front of us, which I welcome. There's a prayer in the margin, and if you've been assigned the prayer for the state of Israel in English, you're welcome to choose to do that one. And then in the normal place, in the top of the page 178, you actually have two prayers, or 1.1 prayer, where there's a 0.1 hiding within the larger prayer, with one bracketed piece, sheteheh, that it may be. So, you know, it can be, we all know there's a difference between the government in Israel or state of Israel, Medinat Yisrael, and Eretz Yisrael, right? Of Zion, of the Israel that the Haftarot talk about, the Israel that we're building that's shining a light onto the nations in all ways. And I've always been comfortable with the original phrasing of the prayer that Israel, the state of Israel, is the beginning of our redemption. But sometimes there's a week in which maybe something's going on in Israel that leaves us feeling like there's still a lot of work to do. Of course, since we do the Haftarah, we know There's a lot of work to do, maybe centuries, maybe millennia, even when there's very pressing business to be done in the next 10 years. And so it allows us to say that it may be the beginning of, may continue to be, may get a little extra push as the beginning of our redemption. And so for those who are reading in either Hebrew and English, you get to choose the conservative movement, the Lev Shalom, whether it's in your heart to say that it is just as I find comfortable, it's the beginning of our redemption. There's a lot of work to do, or that it may be, like we need that extra normative force. It needs to be, it just needs to be in your heart at the time. So today I'm going to read it without the brackets because in my heart today is just that it's the beginning of our redemption. Avinu sheba shamayim, sor Yisrael v'goalo, barech et medinat Yisrael, reshit smichat gulatenu. Hagen aleha bevrat chastecha, ufros aleha sukat shlomecha, ushlach urcha v'amitcha, l'rasheha sareha v'yoatzeha, v'taknem be'etza tova milfanecha. Chazek et yedei meginei eretz kodshenu, v'anchilem Eloheinu Yeshua, ve'ateret nitzachon ta'atrem, v'natata shalom ba'aretz, v'simchat olam v'lioshveha, v'nomar. Amen. Avinu sheba shamayim, stronghold and redeemer of the people Israel, bless the state of Israel, the beginning of our redemption. Shield it with your love, spread over it the shelter of your peace, guide its leaders and its advisors with your light and your truth. Help them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who defend our holy land. Deliver them, crown their efforts with triumph. Bless the land with peace and its inhabitants with lasting joy. And let us say, Amen. A prayer for peace.
Tfilat l'shalom. May we see the day when war and bloodshed cease, when a great peace will embrace the whole world. The nation and the human family will not again know war. For all who live on earth shall realize we have not come into being to hate or to destroy. We have come into being to praise, to labor, and to love. Compassionate God, bless the leaders of all nations with the power of compassion. Fulfill the promise conveyed in Scripture, I will bring peace to the land, and you shall lie down, and no one shall terrify you. I will rid the land of vicious beasts, and it shall not be ravaged by war. Let justice and righteousness flow like a mighty stream. Let God's peace fill the earth as the waters fill the sea. And let us say, Amen.
Amen. We may be seated. Shabbat shalom, everybody. And thanks for everyone who's joining us in the Roomagog and also in the Zoomagog and the Streamagog, the YouTubeagog, and all the gogs that are going on, except for Gog and Magog. We'll wait on those. I have three things. Thanks, Liz. I have three things I'm going to say, and you'll see how quickly they'll go by. The first one is I want to celebrate Lev Shalom at this moment. I didn't want to talk about it earlier in the service. I want to get just the experience of it is the doing of it. I don't need to say much about it, but I'm really grateful to be reunited with it and to extend our Machzor Lev Shalom experience to our daily davening, our Shabbat and holiday davening. It's so important that we have the opportunity to really practice prayer, right? To explore it. It's a massive territory of the heart, and I couldn't encompass it with just a few words. I mean, it's in Hebrew it's shir, it's poetry, it's tefillah. I mean, there's so many words in Hebrew. Sometimes it's just prostrating. Sometimes it's just breaking open your heart. It's not one thing for each prayer. And to have who wrote the prayer and what's a little code in the prayer and what's a poem inspired by the prayer, to have these marginal notes to help us go in new directions, it really truly refreshes each Shabbat experience. And I'm so grateful for it. And another thing I really, really love about it is I know that for maybe some regular goers that like myself, I forget what it's like for my wife and for so many for whom, reading the Hebrew is really, really slow. And of course, what I've been telling people for years is that if you can't follow in the Hebrew, that's okay, because if you come enough, and this is true, I mean, I'm not a liar, I hope. If you listen enough, it's a song. And so you will be able to sing along. So the problem is you can't say, it's chicken and the egg. I'm not going to go because then you'll never, because I can't follow along with the song. When I'm like, well, if you come, you'll know the song. Anyone who's got a 6th or 7th grader and they're getting them ready for the bar mitzvah or the brit mitzvah, then you know, like you got to go because you'll just know it. So when you get up there, you're like, In kamocha Elohim, and you could probably do it in your head, even if you lose your place on the page. So that's all true. But really, there is nothing wrong with praying from transliteration. And so what the Lev Shalem does is it may not transliterate every word of the Siddur. That would make it look very, very, we have a Siddurs for that you can use, but it makes the whole Siddur really Siddur about transliteration and nothing else. And so it gives everything that we do out loud as a congregation in transliteration. And that opens the gates of prayer to many, many people. It makes it more inclusive. So it's another thing that I really love about it. So as we explore it and as you share insights, I already gained an insight at the beginning of the service that I never had about that prayer. And I've used the Lev Shalem before. So I hope that you enjoy exploring it. I'm so grateful to the leadership of the Harold and Jean Grossman Fund. I'm grateful, which was established in memory of Harold and Jean Grossman, parents of Mary Schumann and Nancy Leon. We are so grateful to Nancy and Irv and to Mary and Art for honoring the memories of Harold and Jean by setting up a fund at Beth Israel so their memories continue to bring blessing through nourishing projects that bring new vitality and experiences to Beth Israel's ritual life. So really enhancing the experience of all kinds of rituals that we do in new ways, fresh ways, ways that open the gates and bring people in. And the first act of the fund was to initiate the bulk purchase of the Cedar Ream. So we didn't have to go through the sort of a long process of, are we up to 200? Are we up to 210? Are we up to 220? And then we wait and, whenever we can then order in bulk. So we get an enormous discount. I mean, almost 50%. And so they made possible that the fund would initiate that purchase. And now that fund is being replenished as each of you dedicate the books. We have dedicated over 200 in just a couple of weeks that email has been sent out. And considering that I think 10% of emails are read, that's a pretty amazing number. So everyone, but it also means that we still have 200 Siddur Ream. Mine's one of them. That doesn't yet have a dedication. And it means when you dedicate it, the Siddur was dedicated by you and you bought it, and then the fund is replenished so that it can bring new kinds of experiences to Beth Israel. And I wonder if this is just a tremendous model for philanthropy, a tremendous model for giving to the synagogue, that the blessings keep going and are replenished and continue on. So I'm so grateful. I'm grateful to Mary and to Art and to Nancy and to Irv for making this happen. May the memories of Harold and Jean Grossman continue, as they will, we know, to bring all kinds of blessings, hidden and obvious, to this congregation and thereby to the world. And thanks to each of you that continue to dedicate prayer books, to replenish that fund and to bring a piece of our tradition alive for so many. That was number one. Number two is something I was not going to say, and I'm going to. You'll tell me later if it's the wrong thing. I didn't know whether I should say anything about the Queen. And I felt like the Queen wasn't Jewish, so I'm not going to say anything about the Queen. There's plenty of opportunity to say something about the Queen in other realms. And then I got this email. So I want to share an email from a congregant, from a Beth Israel member who sent this to me. And I hope that if you're like, I'm not sure the rabbi should be talking about the passing of the Queen from the Bima, I hope you hear it from the heart of one of our members. This member is English. Sorry. I want you to know that I am hit badly by the death of the Queen. I grew up with her. My sister was named after her because my mother admired those royal girls, and they were models for us as children. We eagerly followed their little tea parties and doll's house, what they wore and how their hair was cut. The Queen Mother was a Bose Lion, which is very close to where I grew up, where we lived. And I was presented to the Queen Mum when she came to open Kiel University in 1950, and I learned to curtsy as I was then president of the Women's Hall. I remember the street party when her father was crowned king. We all got mugs with the portrait, We were poor and we were always hungry. So the goodies on the long tables were incredible to us. During the war, Elizabeth had our attention all the time. She joined the Women's Army Corps and drove a Jeep, learning to take apart the engine and put it back together again. I was in awe. When she married Prince Philip, I thought he was the most handsome guy in the world. And I was glad that the king gave her permission to marry this penniless prince because she loved him so much. She adored her father and learned a lot about courage because he was terrified of being king. And she learned about duty from him. I remember watching the coronation on a little TV. It was the first time I had ever seen a TV. I was at Kiel sitting next to my close friend, Michael Caron. He electrified all of us as he pointed to the screen and said, "That's my parents on the left, sitting in the diplomat section." I did not know his father was Israel's first ambassador to the UK. And we were all watching a woman monarch. After all these years, I was ecstatic. The way she reached out to the diversity of peoples in the Commonwealth was wonderful. No racism or snobbery in her. It was reported she was never happier than when entertaining Commonwealth people at the palace. Her integrity, her dignity, her brilliant mind, her fidelity and love for her children, no matter what they did that she disapproved, I will never forget. She was a great woman and a great monarch. I can't believe she's gone. She embodied all the decency and intelligence of the British at their best. I'm going to add a note about her son. I've always admired Charles. The media used to make fun of him, and I used to be furious because he was an environmentalist like Al Gore. He was an early organic gardener who spoke out against herbicides and pesticides and modeled his own farming gardens for all to visit, to learn. He angered the architects of England when he criticized the huge skyscrapers and brought us all back to Wordsworth's great poem about the view of a sleeping London from Westminster Bridge in the early morning. Earth hath not seen anything more fair. And yet he was mocked for it. But Charles saw that beauty. I saw him on TV saving the antique furniture from a great estate, explaining why and giving it to museums. My father, a coal miner, once wrote to Charles's Foundation for the Poor. My mother's best friend was killed by a bus at an awkward traffic junction. My father described the dangers for seniors trying to cross the road. He got an immediate answer, and within a year, the traffic roundabout was changed. Charles will be a good king, and it is rumored he will cut down on the size of the royal family. And I hope he has the courage to do so. But nobody could ever replace Elizabeth, his mother. I thank everyone for sharing with me their reflections by email. I do read everything you send, even if I'm very slow with a reply. And I haven't replied yet to them. And a Devar Torah, a word of Torah that is mostly delivered from this parasha, from an inspiring parasha from Rabbi Aviva Richman, the rabbi of the Beit Midrash of Hadar. I'll start with my own words, and then I'll share some quotes from her. This week's extensive parasha deals with some especially disturbing cases that arise in human society, and in so doing continues thematically from last week's Shoftim. I like to say Shoftim and Shotrim, both the judges and those in the criminal justice system. Society must have a fair, this is me, society must have a fair and equitable justice system with due process and without bias and fraud. But sometimes that's not even enough, as we find out in this week's parasha. What does one do about the thorny issue of juvenile crime? We had an amazing social action presentation on that last year, and I learned a lot, and I plan to have him back to present for this parasha next year. Is it the parents' responsibility? Is it the justice systems? How do we manage that difficult interaction of public and private? What do we do about relationships of, marriages, couple relationships of severe imbalance of power within marriages or the workplace? How does the justice system and the injustice that can take place in families and in what happens behind closed doors intersect? And when does one take precedence over the other? In last week's Parsha, I talked about cases of that kind of injustice on campus, and I talked about the demands I feel in Shoftim to say that we can't excuse the investigations and tribunals that take place on campus to understand when we have a he said, she said situation. We can't forgive that depriving due process in the name that it's not a real court and that it's a separate kind of matter, because Shoftim and Shotrim don't distinguish between criminal and civil matters. And they basically say when someone's being punished and there's an investigation taking place, due process is necessary. But I also said that the rabbis lead us to an interesting place on that, where some of the rabbis say there are times when you have not enough witnesses to establish guilt, but you know that one person is lying. And in such cases, maybe instead of thinking of things in the binary way of innocence or guilt as a verdict, there may be middle ways to make messy, sometimes middle ways to make solutions in such cases. This week continues with that theme, and this is what Rabbi Aviva Richman is writing about. And so I switch over to her. In this week's Parsha, we have many cases that bring forward the navigation of these areas. We have the repeat juvenile offender, in which case the Torah navigates these waters. Okay, this is me. In which case the Torah navigates these waters by bringing the outside system into the home in order to prevent parents from taking on the role of judge, jury, and executioner. And we also have issues of sexual assault. Aviva Richman shows the following in the Parsha. She says this: exercising leadership means taking responsibility. At the end of last week's Parsha, the elders of a town closest to the unsolved murder proclaim that they bear no responsibility for the murder and they ask for atonement. Yet the Talmud learns from this ceremony of disclaiming guilt that leaders nonetheless bear responsibility. For example, to provide proper accompaniment as travelers leave their city. So it's the unsolved murder that takes place between jurisdictions. So no one bothered to solve it. The blood of the heifer drips down the leadership's hands, the leaders of those towns, of those cities, as they claim they have no blood on their hands. The importance of leadership taking responsibility can also ground our reading of this week's Parsha, Ki Teitzei, which discusses many examples of illicit acts. Often the Torah points in the direction of determining guilt for the specific parties involved. But some commentaries here offer a path that focuses more on the responsibility of a community and the role of leadership to create a culture wherein bodily integrity and human dignity can both flourish. Every unaddressed case of victimization, like the unsolved murder, should lead a community and its leadership to feel shaken, to step out of their routine, and to reflect on their role in what happened and what it will take for this to go differently in the future. Discussing the assault of a betrothed young woman, the Torah focuses on the environment, drawing a distinction between the city and the field. At face value, this distinction is quite disturbing. In a city, she is presumed to be complicit, for the logic, as it is stated, is she must not have cried out, because if she had, people would have intervened. Her silence is taken as evidence for her consent in Deuteronomy 22, verses 23 to 27. But if the assault happened in the field, she is presumed to have been coerced, because she must have cried out, but nobody was there to hear and respond. The passage raises many questions, because obviously, couldn't there be cases of coercion in the city? What if she couldn't cry out because of coercion or simply because of shock? What if there happened to be no one around to hear it in the city? What if there were people around, but they weren't able or willing to respond? Clearly, this is highly problematic. The rabbis were also sensitive to these obvious concerns, and this is back to my paraphrase, which are not only recent, like the case of the tunneling thief who may be killed by a homeowner, or the case of the parents who wish to execute their own son. A few austere words are indicating larger principles clearly, which may escape our notice at first glance. What are we to take from a distinction between field and city? Certainly the Torah's concern for later charges, possibly by the woman's father upon a hearing of even a consensual act. And so it is trying to navigate how an official or judge can distinguish consent from not. But the language of crying out sounds very much to me like victim blaming. If it is not literal, but it is somehow trying to get at the difficulties of bringing justice to the very private realm without witnesses, then what is meant by the distinction between field and city? And so I return to Rabbi Richman. The Midrash in Sifrei Devarim states the following: is it really possible that she is to be blamed in the city, but she's absolutely innocent? You don't even think of it in the field? It cannot mean that. Therefore, the verse is teaching that the betrothed maiden cried out and there was none to save her. If there is none to save her, meaning whether in the city or the field, she is innocent. And so the question is, was this a context where she could have expected people to hear, care, and respond? It is not the fault of the victim. It is the fault of everybody around the victim. It is our fault. It is a community's fault, like in the case of the unsolved murder. Before any conversation about consent can get off the ground, the rabbi stressed that there has to be an environment that functions as a city. Remember, not it's outside my jurisdiction. It's in a sane and just city where there's a context and culture in which people care. And there is clear expectation of response to an act of sexual coercion. One cannot look at an individual's silence or screaming in a vacuum. In other words, the distinction is not about the woman's agency, because that would be victim blaming. It's about our agency. A medieval commentary explains that the definition of a city, a culture that cares, depends on leadership. In a passage in the Talmud that discusses cases of wives taken as captives, Rabbi Yom Tov ben Avraham of the 13th century Seville, known as the Ritva, posits that under the rule of King Ahasuerus in the Purim story, the entire kingdom of Persia should be classified as a field because it wasn't a proper city. He describes Ahasuerus as a womanizer and goes on to say that anyone in his kingdom took advantage of a woman, victimized her, didn't care about it, because they knew the king was their model. So no one in the city would take it seriously. Due to its leader and culture, the height of civilization at the time, it was like being in the middle of nowhere, because no one would pay attention or respond to this sort of victimization. Rabbi Yom Tov goes on to say that in cases such as the one before us in the city, the fact that women didn't scream in no way indicated that they were complicit. They didn't scream because they knew that no one was listening. They were silent not because they consented, but out of despair. The city versus field distinction isn't about whether there happen to be some bystanders who could swoop in valiantly to rescue a victim. It's not about individuals, it's about our culture. When a leader sets a tone of not caring about sexual assault, it can't help but pervade the entire ethos of the culture. It will happen all the time, shrouded in silence of despair and fear, and will have far-reaching impact as an assault on the dignity of many people in their bodies, while root causes remain unaddressed, like the unsolved murder. In our own time, the stories of Me Too are destabilizing. Are we in a city? Are we in a field? Are we in a context where we can expect that individuals' bodies and dignity are taken seriously, that people care? Focusing on the importance of culture challenges us to dream a better reality. Ritva is dealing with the case of Jewish women in the Persian kingdom where they were a minority population, victims of an external culture over which they have no control, and that dimension needs to be considered. And naming this city as a town leads to the best possible outcome in these constrained circumstances, because it means that such victims may remain married to their husbands rather than being treated as guilty of adultery. But his language and teaching invites us to think about a bigger challenge. How do we take responsibility for the culture in our own communities and the leaders we put in place? How do we build a city that is a culture that cares? Again, our thanks to Orthodox Rabbi Aviva Richman from Hadar. Shabbat Shalom. Service continues with Musaf. We're on page 184 in the middle. Please rise.
Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabba Yamadi v'akirutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon uv'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael V'agala v'zman karib v'yimeru amen. Yeshme rabba mevorach Leolam le'om maya yipara Yipara v'yishtabach v'yipar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitale v'yitala Shemei dekudesha brichu le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata Tushbechata v'nechemata damiram v'yama v'yimeru amen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu Elohei Abraham Elohei Yitzchak v'Elohei Yaakov Elohei Sarah Elohei Rivka Elohei Rachel v'Elohei Leah El Hagadol Hagibor v'Hanora El Elyon Gomel Chasadim Tovim v'Konei Hakol v'Zocher Chasdei Avod u'Mevi Goel Livnei Bneihem L'ma'an Shemo B'Ahava Melech Ozer Fukedu Moshiach Magin Baruch Atah Adonai Magin Avraham Ufoked Sarah Tagibor Leolam Adonai Mechayim Eitim HaTorah V'Hoshia Mechalkel Chaim B'Chesed Mechayim Eitim B'Rachamim Rabim Somech Noflim V'Rofei Cholim Umatir Asurim Umekayim emunato Yishenei afar Michamocha bal gevurot Umido melach Melech neimit umechayeh Umatzmiach Yeshua v'ne'emanat ala chayot meitim Baruch atah Adonai mechayeh hametim.
187.
Na'aritzecha v'na'akdishcha kesod siach sarfei kodesh hamakdishim shimcha b'kodesh kakatuv al yad neviyecha Bekara ze'el ze'vi'amar Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh Adonai tzvaot Melech chol haaretz kivodo Kivodo malei olam Meshartav sholim zeh lazeh Ayeh mekom kivodo liyumatam baruch yomeru Baruch kivod Adonai mimkomo Mimkomo yivem barachamim v'yachonam amiachadim shemo erev avoker b'chol yom tamid pamayim b'yava shema omrim Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Hu Eloheinu, Hu Avinu, Hu Malkeinu, Hu Moshienu, Vehu Yashmienu berachamav, Shenit, Li'enei kol chai, Liot lachem le'Elohim, Ani Adonai Elohechem, U'v'divrei kachecha katuv le'mor, Yimloch Adonai le'olam, Elohayich Tzion, Le'dor v'ador, Hallelujah, Le'dor v'ador nagid godlecha, U'lenetzach netzachim kedushatcha nakdish, V'shivchacha Eloheinu mipinu lo yamush le'olam va'ed, Ki el melech gadol v'kadosh ata baruch ata Adonai ha'el.
For those still davening, please continue as the rest of us are on 203.
יתקרב יקרא שמי רבה, ויעמד דבר קראתי וימליך מלכותי בחיי אחרון ויום אחרון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל, בעגלה בזמן קריב ויאמרו, אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך, לעולם יומי יומיה יתברך, יתברך וישתבח ויפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו, לעילה מן כל ברכת ושירת ותושבחת ונחמת אדם מרם בימה ויאמרו, אמן. תתקבל צלות ונבואות בכל ישראל, קודם ובהון דבשמיא ויאמרו, אמן. יהי שלום הרבה מן שמיא, וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו, אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ויאמרו, amen.
Jordan comes forward on page 204, or you can also look at the art curtain for Ein Elohim.
Big Elohim, big Elohim, hey Mike, no, Aleinu l'shabeach v'adonako, v'achiv gdula yoseh ha'prishi, shelo asanu k'yaso, v'lo samanu k'mishtakot ha'ava, shelo samka k'nukahem, v'lo rachenu k'chol ha'avot. Moshe Bikaro Bashamayim Lima'al Ushina Tuzo V'Kavenu Elohim Hu Eloheinu Emek Malkeinu Efesulato Kakatu B'Torato V'Adatayom V'Adatayom V'Hashivota Elevadecha Ki Adonai Hu Elohim Bashamayim Imahal V'Haaretz V'Haaretz V'Yitah. הכתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
May be seated. Beth Israel congregation remembers, among others this week, the Yortzites of Vera Adler, Louis Aronson, Norma Ball, Rena Bardenstein, Benjamin Hyman, Samuel Bergman, Morris Berry, Marvin Finkel, Isidore Friedman, Edward Glazer, Ruth Neiman Gray, Burl Gross, Chaim Gert, Lillian Blaine Herzig, Batya Holishitz, Dali Honig, Avram Lifshitz, Saul Meisels, Barry Morrell, Arthur Nemeth, Ruth Rose Rontal, Ruth Rothschild, Rose Soloway, Robert Milton Summers, Abraham Saminsky, Beulah Stein, Edna Stone, Pauline Tish, Shoshana Vinegar, Martha Weiss, Lena Yaffe, Rose Yaffe, Joseph Zwick, and Morris Zverdling. As we continue to say Kaddish, this being the very last recitation of the 12 months for Natalie Scher. And we continue to say Kaddish for Susan Feingold Schultz and Judith Cashton, and Lorraine Sherman and Michael Adams, and Leona Leon, Phyllis Werbel, Fanchen Lessing, Carol Feinerman, David Fellman, Bruce Stahl, Carol Amster, Gary Joseph Ullman, Paul Ernest Phillips, Leslie Garber Matthews, Raisa Levinskaya, Ellis Cohen, Toby Barbin Rothaus, Vivian Perlstein, Marty Lindenauer, Bonnie Rosenberg, Harleen Appelman, and Dr. Lionel Finkelstein. Along with all of those for whom we are saying Kaddish, recite with me on page 207, those for whom they have the obligation are standing. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah v'yalma divra pirute v'yamlich malchute v'chayechon uvyomechon uv'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala u'izman kari v'imru. Amen. Yehi shmei Rabbah mevarach le'olam u'lamei almayeh Yibarach v'yishtabach v'yipa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh V'yitadar, v'yitaleh, v'yitalal, Shmei Kudashah, Rifu, Le'ela min kol berchata v'shirata, Tushbechata v'nechamata, Da'amiran v'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shmaya, V'chayim aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Useh shalom v'romah, Hu ya'aseh shalom, Aleinu v'yakol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May their memories continue to bring blessings into this world in often unexpected ways. I'm going to ask you to turn to page 113. We are in Elul, rapidly approaching Rosh Hashanah for Psalm 27. I'm going to ask you to read it to yourself silently, and I'm calling up Deborah Ball to share a reflection on it once we've had a time to peruse it ourselves. Page 113, Psalm 27. Lule hamanti, l'rot b'tuv Adonai be'eretz chayim, kaveh el Adonai, chazak ya'amet libecha, v'kaveh el Adonai. Deborah Ball.
Shabbat Shalom again. Last week, I shared a poem from this book, Opening Your Heart with Psalm 27, which contains for each verse of Psalm 27 a poem that's reflective of the depth of this psalm. And I chose a different one to read to you this week. So this is from the fourth line. One thing I have sought from Adonai, how I long for it, that I may live in the house of Adonai all the days of my life, that I may look upon the sweetness of Adonai and spend time in the palace. And the fourth word are me'et Adonai, and there's a footnote that says that Michel Dahoud suggests that the word me'et is related to the word me'ah, the number 100, which you'll see in this poem. So this is the poem. First, it sounds like I'm nagging. If I've asked you once, I've asked you 100 times. Next, I start to sound focused. I'm not asking for a lot, not 100 things, just one thing, and it's the most important to me. Then I remember the Talmud's spiritual practice, offer 100 blessings a day. All day, ask God for one thing 100 different ways. Please receive my prayer. I'm alive in your house and I'm so very grateful. 100 blessings a day requires an early start. Eyes open, thank you. Breath flowing, thank you. Standing upright, thank you. Sun rose, thank you. Ground firm beneath my feet, thank you. In every challenging situation, thank you for courage. After every difficult conversation, thank you for patience. With every disappointment, thank you for hope. For every difficult disappointment, for every physical discomfort, thank you for strength. At each accomplishment, small and large, thank you. The opportunities for gratitude abound. With each bite of food, thank you for the soil. Thank you for the sunshine. Thank you for the rain. Thank you for the farmer. Thank you for the person who transported this food and the person who sold it. It takes all day to get from 1 to 100. A beautiful pink cloud at sunset, thank you. The silence of the night, thank you. The stars spread across the sky, thank you. The love of a spouse, a partner, a parent, a child, love for myself, thank you. The renewing power of sleep, thank you. All day, every day, 100 times a day, I ask one thing. Please receive my prayer. I am alive in your house, and I am so very grateful. Earlier in the service, I welcomed Jerry Sarakin, and I wanted to be clear that there were many people to thank for his arrival and many people who are very grateful he's here. I want to extend 3 more people who are very grateful. I wanted to separate them out from the people who seem to run the office. Meg Bernstein, Amanda Fisher, and Heather Gale undoubtedly are breathing also a sigh of relief, like many of us, to have that structure that we'll have in the synagogue for the very important responsibilities that they carry out as well. So there are many of us sharing in this joy of this day, and I hope we're not scaring you, Jerry, for all the people who are like so excited.
I'm not easily scared.
Anyway, welcome again, and please join us for Kiddush, where we'll have some special treats in honor of Jerry and in honor of Shabbat Lev Shalom. I want to add my thanks to the Leons and Art and Mary Schumann for the wonderful occasion of this inaugurating our new Siddur. Rabbi Kane asked me if I had dressed in the colors of the Siddur today. I confess that I didn't have that idea, but those of you know I mostly wear black 95% of the time. Maybe a sign from God that I'm wearing this color today, I don't know. A few announcements. Tomorrow morning, very exciting, school starts. It's hugely exciting. I understand from Heather that our enrollments are up substantially this year, which is really to the credit of work that Heather and others have done to welcome new families. It's very, very exciting. And thank you also to Carrie for her support of Heather and the school, and all of you who are supporting the school and helping it to develop. It's extremely exciting to see the kind of, I don't know, if rebirth or renaissance or extension of our school. So congratulations to everybody who's been involved in that. There's still time to register your child online if you haven't yet, and the form is available. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock, Beth Israel reads. They're discussing the book People Love Dead Jews. I think some of you may have heard the talk by the author at the Federation event last year. They'll be discussing that book at noon. You can visit the website to register for that. On Monday, September 12th, another session of Talmud study with Rabbi Daberson. They're continuing to read the tractate Bava Kama that deals with the question of what the extent of individual responsibility is for injuries suffered by others. Next Friday, September 16th at 6 o'clock, we have Rabbi Ora Ahuvia who will be leading our monthly musical Kabbalat Shabbat service. You might wonder, monthly? We had a musical Shabbat last night, which was wonderful. Thank you to all who were involved, to Neil Alexander and his group, and Rabbi Kane for a wonderful Motown Shabbat, but another musical Shabbat, a different one next Friday. Next Saturday, September 17th, we have Slichot. There'll be a program and a service. There'll be a text study by Rabbi Joel Goldstein on forgiveness or atonement. What are we seeking? And a Slichot davening led by Rachel Jacobson at 8:45. And in the morning, I skipped over that. In the morning, Neil Alexander will be here getting us kind of warmed up for the melodies of the holidays. So at Shabbat morning services, we'll be hearing some of those melodies that we'll be chanting so many times over the coming weeks. And I think with that, thank you to all for this wonderful morning, and Shabbat Shalom to everyone.
Shabbat Shalom. As Matt comes up for page 211, in honor of the new executive director and his amazing family, in honor of the new Lev Shalom, in honor of, can I say that hopefully a different September than we had last year and the year before, maybe a little bit more sweetness and new beginnings or refreshed beginnings. Let's do a Sheffian. Baruch atah Adonai Be'iyanu Thank God who gave us life. Thank God who's allowed us to live our span up till now. And thank God who is delivering us to these moments of a new beginning. Adon Olam.
Adon Olam Asher Malach B'terem Kol Yitzir Nivra Li'et Nasa B'chefzo Kareki Flotakol Levado Yimlok Nora Ve'u Haya Ve'u Ove Ve'u Yeh B'tifara הוא אחד ואין שני להמשיך לו להכבירה בלי ראשית בלי תכלית ולא העוז והמשרה והוא אלי וחי גואלי וצורך לבלי ויצרה והוא ניסי ומנוס לי מנת כוסי ביומק רע בידו הפקיד רוחי בעת אישן ביעירה ואמרו לי גביעתי אדוני לי ולא יירא בידו הפקיד רוחי בעת אישן ביעירה ואמרו לי גביעתי Adonai li velo